It's good. So, well, man, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out. You got an interesting story, and I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you bet. So to begin with, I kind of want to address the elephant in the room. 4 years ago, we were looking at this pandemic, trying to figure out how long it was going to last, how it was going to affect us. So ultimately, in this kind of post-pandemic era we're living in, how did you make it through, and how did it change you?
Oh man, I actually look at it, and I think there's probably two or three ways to kind of look at the pandemic. There's a lot of people that look at it like, hey, man, it was terrible, it was bad. And then if you look at the media, of course, that then everything was a bad thing. But I think it also gave us a very unique opportunity to dive into things that a lot of people hadn't done in a while. I mean, you look at how many artists, how many athletes, how many entrepreneurs like came out of the pandemic because they had all this free time to get creative. We didn't have to go sit in traffic for 3 hours a day. We had like bonus time. And so I looked at that time and I said, man, what can I do with this time? And I was, had done that prior to the pandemic. January 1st, didn't know about the pandemic, started my little podcast, Blaze Your Own Trail, on January 1st. Didn't know the pandemic was coming, but because I already had a show established for basically, 90 days essentially before everything shut down, I had enough presence and credibility from the brand that I was building that it gave me access to a lot of people that I wouldn't have been able to access, right? Because who was at home? Everybody. We
Yeah,
all were. And
yeah.
so to be able to access people that were experts, high net worth individuals, athletes, celebrity. I mean, you could pretty much get a hold of anybody because they were doing the same thing we were all doing, which was sitting in a room somewhere or sitting in their yard or something like that because people literally couldn't go anywhere. So I looked at that as an opportunity, and my goal was to, how do I capitalize on this, but also how do I tap into some strengths or some talents or some things that I hadn't done in a while that I'm super passionate about that maybe I can get back into. That's kind of the lens that I looked at that through. And then you had some people that were just kind of passive, where they were, maybe a little upset, maybe, they enjoyed it, but they were just kind of right in the middle. So, but I think those are really the three lenses that people can look at that time through.
It's interesting you mentioned the 90 days thing. I hadn't even thought about that after all these times and interviews that I've had talking about this. And that's the time frame that you form a habit, you know? So that's interesting. And the other thing I was thinking too, and it's so true. When this whole thing began, I was really primarily doing jazz radio. And I thought the best way for me to get through this, and the most productive best ways to ramp up my interviews, and just like you said, everybody's at home. And I didn't immediately realize that, but I think I started realizing anybody out there that was always on the road, and especially legendary musicians, they're not going to be doing that anymore. So yeah, that was the time to shine. And that's the thing about that time. It had a monopoly on us. We had no choice. So it was really up to the way that you wanted to delve out your time and to take advantage of it.
100%.
Yeah. So let's get into the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis in your consulting world. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day.
Sure.
One of the curious little kids says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Yeah, I help businesses and brands and entrepreneurs get more attention, get more visibility. So if it's, to their website, if it's to sell more books, if it's to download, get more downloads for their podcast, if it's just general awareness because they want to build authority and build that know, like, and trust factor to get people to say, hey, when I'm thinking about X, Y, or Z, I want to reach out to Joe. Does that make sense? So that's what I would say to a third grader is just helping people get more attention so that they can attract more customers or people to whatever their goals are.
What did you want to be when you were in that position in the third grade?
So as a third grader, I was the soccer player that hated soccer and loved fundraising. So I was the kid that would sell all the beef jerky and all the candy and sometimes we'd eat it, and my mom would have to pay for it anyways, But
Yeah.
I actually enjoyed that. I've always been a people person. I've always just loved talking to anybody and everybody, and of course, the fact that I've been doing podcasting for 4 years, it makes sense, right? Because if you can't shut up, you might as well start a podcast because
Yeah.
someone's listening, or you're listening at least to yourself, and you get to get a lot of stuff out of your system, if that makes sense. So that's actually what I was in third grade. I had just thought that I wanted to have a business one day. I didn't know what it was, but I definitely, did not want to put on a suit, which I did for about 15 years. So we can talk about that a little bit, but didn't want to do that. Did it right? Got to pay the bills. But once I left and blazed my own trail, 3.5 years ago, I was like, no more suits. Funerals and weddings for me.
Yeah. Well, what do they call it? An upside down noose?
That's right. Yes.
So the other thing about the COVID time is that you have a compromised lung issue.
I do not. No, no. My mom actually was born in the 50s with one lung,
Okay, so it was your
and
mom.
yeah,
So
yeah.
okay, so that was what and I okay, that's so what did that teach you? What was
Oh
that like?
man, so many lessons. When you grow up, and we were very poor. I mean, moved a lot, moved 14 times from birth to 14. I don't know why. I think it's just because getting evicted, can't pay the bills, you got to go find another place to live. And so food stamps, and had an alcoholic stepdad that was abusive to my mom. And on top of that, she was disabled. She had one lung. And when I was about 11 or 12, she had to start using oxygen. So, having to help take care of somebody that can't take care of themselves. But I think some of the biggest lessons that she taught me, of course, there's tons of lessons of like responsibility at a young age, having to fend for yourself, becoming, in early 80s latchkey kid where, you're kind of running around doing things in survival mode. But, she really taught us about kindness. She had a great sense of humor. She never used her lung as a crutch. She never used that, and was a victim of her circumstance. And she always believed in me and my brothers, and really just told us that we could do whatever we wanted, and that's something that's always stuck with me. Just the power of seeing somebody that has every reason to be begrudging, that has every reason to be negative, and in spite of that stays positive. And
Yeah.
so, even though I've been through even a ton of different adversity in my life, I still don't look at any of it as the level of adversity that I saw my mom go through for her 54 years on the planet. Because I mean, just imagine that you can't breathe all day long, and then you have oxygen, and then you're wearing the machines at night. I mean, it couldn't have been easy to live like that and to do it with a smile. So I think that's probably the biggest lesson to me, is it doesn't matter what you're going through. You can still have a choice of how you react and how you respond and how you show up, right? How you show up in the world. Yes, things are hard. Yes, there are tough things, and yes, people go through hard stuff, but we have a choice, folks. Every day when we wake up, am I going to be a victim, or am I going to be a victor over my circumstances? Am I going to blaze a trail that I want to blaze, or am I going to blaze the trail that people are telling me to blaze, if that makes sense? So,
Yeah. So I'm curious, you talked about being more into fundraising than actually soccer. Was it the circumstances you grew up in, moving all the time and having to fight for money? How did you get to this place? What were the seeds that were planted for you to be a branding expert?
oh man, so I think it kind of happened by accident, you know. So again, I've always enjoyed communication. I've loved social media. I mean, I was an early MySpacer, right, where I was building this network on MySpace when it was first coming out, and then when Facebook came out, I was trying to figure the platform out. So as new platforms came out, Twitter, Snapchat, I would just be on them and just trying to figure it out. I loved to be able to get messages out and to communicate with people. And that really never turned to anything back then, but it was really when I was in my corporate world. I remember I was down in Orlando, Florida. I was in a rental car with my boss, and he's like, "Hey, you're pretty good at this social media thing." And I wasn't. I was mediocre at best. And he goes, "How about you find a platform that we can get our associates engaged on, something that where maybe, we can post stuff and then they can give their feedback. And so I said, okay, cool, I'll take this challenge on. And this is part of my bonus for the year. So I'm like, all right, I gotta get this thing right. So I went on to Snapchat, I went on to Instagram, really wasn't finding it. It wasn't going to be the place. I went onto Facebook and said, maybe we build a Facebook group. We can build some community there. And I was like, yeah, this is not going to work. And then kind of went on LinkedIn. And this was about April of 2019. And the platform at this point was very interesting because it went from all static posts to video now. This is when video was just introduced. And so I started being a consumer. I started consuming content. I started seeing what other people were doing, and I was really getting inspired by what people were doing. I said, okay, well, maybe I can post a video and ask people's feedback on how to create, get on a platform to engage our associates. And so that was my first video on LinkedIn, and it was very bad. And I remember doing about 12 takes, and like, no, no, that sucked. That was terrible. All the imposter syndrome in the world, because I was like, A, who's gonna watch this? B, who's gonna care? C, like, why would like, who am I to post anything on anything, right? I was just all up in my own head, and I did post it, and it did get 5 views, and they were all me because I kept rewatching the video. But I learned a lesson, right? I learned that, hey, you know what? It was uncomfortable, and I may have sounded silly and looked silly. And when I watched back that video, and that was what, almost 6 years ago now. One of my businesses is a social media agency that helps people, right? So it's funny just to kind of look back and reflect on how I got into it, because I was just like everybody else, fumbling around trying to figure things out. And as you put in reps and as you fumble and then learn from that and then figure things out, that can turn into a business. It can turn into systems. It can turn into a framework. It can turn into processes that, if people follow it, they can also have similar results.
Yeah, for sure. So you had mentioned how big your mom, how inspirational your mom was, but ultimately, who's been a hero for you in your career path? Who's been the inspiration for you?
Oh man, definitely mom. I mean, 1,000%. Now, my dad has, so just add another kind of wrench into the mix. Didn't meet my dad till I was 12. He's a Filipino immigrant, jumped ship in the 80s to, get a piece of the American dream. And at 12, my mom said, hey, listen, would you like to go meet your dad in DC? And I said, sure. When are we going? And she goes, no, you're going by yourself. I said, okay, well, doing a lot of grown up stuff. Let's add another one to the mix. And I jumped on a plane from Portland, Oregon to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and we land in Washington National by myself. And I get off the plane and I walk out, and there's this, Asian people, and I didn't identify as an Asian because I grew up with a white mom. My stepdad was from Palawan, but I never met my dad. Didn't know the guy, and so it was very weird. It was interesting, but that summer was really cool because I got to meet my grandfather from the Philippines that was in town. I got to meet my grandmother, my stepmom, and stepbrother, and I got to learn about the culture. I got to learn about what my dad did. He owned a landscaping business, and you want to talk about hard work? Talk about waking up at 6 a.m. and not getting home until 8 p.m. because you're working 12, 13 hours a day, cutting grass, weed eating, mowing, digging holes. And he taught me a lot about, determination. And he taught me a lot about making sure the job's done right the first time. Because, as I grew older and went from 12 to 13 to 14 to 15 to, to early 20s, I was running the crew in the summer. I was going out for 3 months, and I had 35 houses to do in that 12 hours time. And it better have been done right, or my dad was sending us back to the job to make us pick up even one single stick, because he kept his customer base. And here's something that just kind of shows what he modeled for me, what it turned out like for him. Because in January of this year, so just a handful of months ago, he just retired after 40 years of having that business, and most of his customer base stayed with him for 30 plus years, and he had never done any marketing. Now, I look at it in hindsight, it's always 2020. I look at it and say, dad, if you would have done this and this and this and this and this, man, you could have had a bigger business. But when I look at what he's built as a result of it, he's got a rice mill in the Philippines. He's got a boarding house with 80 college students that brings in recurring revenue. He built his dream home. He's building an addition on it. He's got land and he's retired. And so that is every, person's American dream that's from another country is they want to come to this country and they want to make a name for themselves and hopefully one day retire, and I got to see him do that. And so that's been really, really cool. And so outside of my mom, again, we don't have as strong as a relationship still. I mean, it was 12, right? But I still have a lot of respect. I have grown to not have resentment and forgive him for whatever reason, because I understand now as a father of five with one on the way that we're human and we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make plenty more than we do the successes in our life, and we just have to understand and realize that we all are going through the same things. And so when I was able to have a little bit more context, and I think it probably took the loss of my mom, to kind of see her journey, and then kind of understanding the sacrifice that my dad had to make, leaving his family for halfway around the world to try to make a life for himself. So I think there's a lot of lessons from both of my parents, and they're definitely both big inspirations for me.
So in the world of branding, what's one of your favorite examples of branding, of rising from the ashes or just getting to prominence in the business world? Who is that for you?
I think it has to be Nike. And when I read the book by Phil Knight, Shoe Dog. I mean, what an incredible story! The guy's
Yeah.
slinging sneakers out of his trunk, and flying to Japan. I mean, and into Hawaii and all this, and just the adversity, right? And he's a trailblazer. He is somebody that I'd love to interview that guy on my show, Blaze Your Own Trail, because he blazed a trail literally from nothing, and just see what he's turned that into. And so their motto too, like, just do it. It's just, I don't care what business you're in, just do it. I don't care what idea you have, just do it. And it really goes along with blazing a trail. Like, you're gonna run into stuff. It's not gonna be easy. The road's not gonna be smooth. And I think there was a pastor, he spoke at my church. And this is several years ago, but he said something really powerful, and I'd love to share it with your audience, because hopefully this will shift their mindset when it comes to struggling, or instability and stability and all of that. And what he said was, instability creates stability, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And how powerful is that, right? Like, we have
Mhm.
to get unstable. We have to get out of our comfort zone if we want to find a little bit of balance. And
Yeah.
it's a little counterintuitive, which, really all good advice is counterintuitive, because if it was intuitive, right, you'd already be doing it.
Yeah. That's interesting. You've seen the movie, right? The Michael Jordan movie?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The series on Netflix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Incredible.
the movie actually with Ben Affleck about how they actually got Michael Jordan to be a part of the Nike empire.
No, I haven't actually watched that yet. So
Oh, wow.
it's on my list.
Yeah, with speaking of Phil Knight, if you really want to compound the notion of what he did, because essentially, this isn't giving anything away. In the beginning, it was a running shoe, and he was fine with that. And then they go after this big fish, and from The Last Dance, he was like everybody was going to Converse. No one thought
Yeah.
about Nike. No one thought about another brand. So it's interesting. It just it proves the point that Phil was the kind of guy that was like, we're going to do something that no one thinks we can do, and that's it. The rest is history. So. Um,
100%.
so let me ask you this. What is the drive? What's the fire for you every day to get up, to do this work, to help your clients get to a better place, and to also evolve as a human being yourself? What is that that makes you do that?
Well, to answer it just in a one word, it's impact. It's how can I impact people in a positive way. And when I was in my corporate role, 8 years of that role, I was actually in training and development. So my role, my literal job, was to help people become better versions of themselves. And as part of that, back in 2016, I got certified in Myers-Briggs, which is the MBTI. It's one of the most widely used personality assessments globally. And going through that, which I was a terrible student in school, hated school, like barely made it out of high school. I was more interested in girls and breakdancing than I was in going to classes. But So I had to get certified in something like an actual certification, and it was stuck because I hated it. It was like reminded me of being back in school. I had classes for 8 hours, and man, I was like highlighting stuff like crazy, taking note. I mean, it was probably the most effort that I put into something from a professional development or educational standpoint. And then after getting that certification, I was relieved because I didn't want to lose my job. Like I want to be the one guy that didn't get certified out of this cohort, you know. B, I had something that was for life. It's a lifetime certification, and what's really interesting about personality and really diving in and understanding how we're wired is it really helps us understand other people. And so that's been really, really cool because as part of a 6-month leadership program that I taught, MBTI was the baseline. So I got to see like people's minds blown. And there were people that were literally living in an alternate personality type that realized that they had been living because that's what other people saw them as. And it's really, really interesting when we can find out, hey, am I an introvert or an extrovert? And how far extroverted am I, or how, far introverted, or am I kind of in the middle, right? Understanding if I'm more intuitive or if I'm a feeling type. And so when people really get to understand that baseline, and one thing I will say, folks, is that your type is not the end all be all, okay? And this tool is just a tool. So understanding type is important, but it's not completely who you are as a human being, if that makes sense. But that was something that really, as people started to graduate that leadership program, Joe, and they started to tell me things like, Jordan, my life has actually changed. My relationships are better at home. My relationships are better with my coworker. And one thing I didn't mention is I got to coach these folks. There was about 20 people in the cohort each year for 3 years, so 60 people over 3 years. I got to coach them one-on-one for 6 months outside of the context of class, where I taught an 8-hour session each month on leadership, on things like developing their strengths and increasing their strengths, on things like emotional intelligence, on things like, really becoming a high performer. And when I started to see the impact that that was having on these people in the corporate context, I said, if I want to do the impact that I truly believe in my heart I'm called to do, I can't do it in the context of corporate. And
Yeah.
so that's really where it was for me. And so I know I started it with the word impact, but I wanted to truly give you the context of
Yeah.
how and why I left for that reason.
So of all of these things that you've done and evolved into in your life up to this point, what are you the proudest of?
Oh man, so I think I'm proud of all of it, because what people don't see behind the scenes is the probably 10 or 12 failed business ideas, that I had for the first 35 years of my life, whether it was perfumes or potions or whatever I was trying to sell to try to make ends meet. So the fact that I have had a couple wins, a couple successes, and what's really cool is just how the Blaze Your Own Trail and trailblazing brand has evolved, because outside of the show, which is part of the brand, I've got Blaze Your Own Trail Consulting. The end of last year, a buddy of mine co-founded a 3D printing company. It's called Blazing 3D Prints. I actually just became an equity partner in a outsourcing agency that we're rebranding to Blazed Outsourcing. We've got a team of 31 in the Philippines, helping business owners all around the world with tasks. So video editing, graphic design, CRMs, all of that. I'm going to be launching my first event called Blaze Your Own Trail Live. That'll be in early 2025. And then one of the other things on my heart is to create a nonprofit called Blazing Hearts. And our goal is just to be an outreach arm to the community here locally, and be able to give back and have a portion of proceeds from our business to be able to feed into that business. So got a lot of big things, a lot of
Yeah.
BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals on the list. Now that we've got our sixth one coming, we're looking at a bunch of land. It's not a joke. We are looking for land because we got a lot of people, and so yeah, man, I'm having the most fun I've had. It's nice being a free agent as well. That enabled me to partner up with a company in Belgium, so I'm part owner of a Belgian startup, been involved with that for a couple of years. And then I consult a bunch of other startups, and man, I'm just having a bunch of fun hanging out with awesome people like you and getting to share my story, and hoping that it inspires other people just to know that despite what you've gone through, despite your circumstances, any adversities, you can blaze a trail. You just have
Absolutely.
to be willing to step up to the plate. You got to be willing to pick yourself up. And one thing I would say, some advice is surround yourself with the people that you want to become. So make sure you have great mentors, great coaches. I surround myself with people way smarter than me, who have way more wealth than me, because I know if just a little bit rubs off, then it's going to help me elevate and become a better version of me.
So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, but you're in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think that I'm a giver. I love to give value. I love to help. Some people might say a little too much. Hey, like, really? Did you do? It's like, listen, you can't outgive anything, right? You just can't outgive. I mean, if I give something away, the impact that it has on them is going to be highly significant. And one of my mentors, name's David Meltzer, when he was on my podcast a couple years ago, he said something so profound, and I'd love to share it with your audience here in closing. And what he said is, he said that I want to plant trees, or plant seeds for trees that I will never sit under. And that's kind of the same mission I really have, is I want to be able to help a lot of people, and really show people what it means to give, what it means to help, what it means to be of service, and really give more than I take. That's always one of my goals with all my clients, with every business endeavor that I'm in, is I want to give more value than I'm taking.
So if anybody wants to reach out, learn more about you, hire you, any of the good business in your world, where's the best place to go?
Yeah, I would say go right to the podcast. It's super easy. It's byotpod.com. It's Blaze Your Own Trail podcast. That way you can kind of check me out. You can see some of the folks I've had on. It'll link you to all our social, to some of the group coaching programs, all that stuff you can get right from the show. And I hope you become a listener. Check it out. We'd love your feedback. And Joe, I just want to acknowledge you, brother. You do an amazing job.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much for the opportunity to come and share.
Yeah.